The rewriting of the 1927 film, The Lodger by Alfred Hitchcock. Chapter 5, Shadows on the Wall. The fog returned with a vengeance that night, swirling around the gas lamps like ghosts trapped in glass. The house on the narrow street felt more like an island than a home, cut off from the rest of London by a sea of murk and silence. Ellen sat alone in the parlour, knitting needles idle in her lap. The fire crackled weakly. She couldn't focus on anything except the sound of footsteps pacing above her. The lodger's pacing had become more erratic since the police visit, faster sometimes, agitated, as though he were arguing with someone who wasn't there. Then abruptly silent, as if he were listening for an answer. Every so often, she heard the creak of the bed frame or the scrape of a chair dragged across the floor. Once, something heavy dropped, a thud that made her grip tighten around the arm of her chair. "Ellen." Robert's voice croaked from the doorway. "You're pale. Come sit." She hadn't noticed him rising from his chair. His cough sounded worse tonight. "I'm fine," she lied. "You should rest." Robert sank slowly into his seat, blanket around his shoulders. "What's he doing up there, d'you think?" "I don't know," Ellen murmured. "But it doesn't feel right." Robert glanced toward the ceiling. "Has he ever been improper toward Daisy?" "No," Ellen said quickly. Then, softer, "No. Not that. Something else. Something she still couldn't name." "Maybe he's simply odd," Robert said. "Odd men pay rent as well as normal ones." Ellen tried to smile. It faltered. Another heavy footstep sounded above them, a sharp, impatient one. Ellen's shoulders jumped. Daisy came home late, cheeks reddened from the cold, skirts dusted with the dampness of the fog. She burst through the door with a gust of cold air. "Evening," she said cheerfully. "Heavens, it's like walking through wet wool out there." "Close the door," Ellen urged. "You'll let the chill in." Daisy laughed and complied, shaking out her scarf. "Mum, there's a crowd gathering down on Baker Lane. Police everywhere. Another scare. People think they spotted the Avenger." Ellen stiffened. "Did you see anything?" Robert asked. "No, they'd cordoned it off." But, Daisy's eyes widened as footsteps sounded overhead. She leaned in closer. "Has he been pacing all night again? I could hear him from the corner." Ellen's heart thudded. "From the street?" "Yes." Daisy lowered her voice, half teasing, half uneasy. "It's like he doesn't sleep." Ellen exchanged a worried glance with Robert. "Go sit by the fire, love," he said gently. Daisy obeyed, though she kept looking toward the stairs. Later that evening, after Daisy had gone to her room, Ellen carried a tray of fresh linens and stepped quietly up the stairs. She wasn't planning to knock, just to check the hallway, reassure herself that nothing was amiss. But the moment she reached the landing, she stopped short. The lodger's door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of light cut across the hallway floor. Inside, a shadow moved, long, thin, deliberate. It stretched across the wall like a dark silhouette of a man leaning over something. Ellen's breath caught. She leaned in a fraction, just enough to glimpse the corner of the room. The lodger was seated at the small table, coat still on, lamp burning low. He was bent over the notebook, pencil moving fast and precise. The room around him was meticulously tidy, chairs pushed in, only the notebook and a small black pouch resting on the table's surface. He didn't look up. Ellen's gaze drifted, unwillingly, toward the washstand. There, propped carefully against the wall, was an object she hadn't seen before. A small glass lantern. Its interior glinted faintly. Was it a magnifying lamp? A jeweler's tool? A collector's light? She couldn't tell. Then the lodger paused. His hand froze on the page. For one terrible second, Ellen thought he had seen her. The silence in the room tightened like a rope. But he didn't look toward the doorway. Instead, he exhaled, a slow, shuddering breath that made the hairs on Ellen's arms rise. She saw his shoulders tremble ever so slightly. Not from fear. From grief. Real, consuming grief. He lifted the black pouch and loosened its drawstring, revealing something small and metallic. He held it in his palm, staring at it with an expression that cracked his calm exterior. A pendant. No, a locket. Women's jewelry. His thumb brushed its surface with heartbreaking tenderness. Ellen's breath stilled. Suddenly, the lodger snapped the pouch shut and stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. The movement sent his shadow slashing across the wall. Ellen jumped back from the doorway, heart pounding. The door creaked, ever so slightly, as though he had touched it. But he didn't open it. Instead, after a long and agonizing moment, she heard him sit again. The chair scraped. The pacing resumed. Ellen tiptoed back down the stairs. Each step felt like a whisper of warning beneath her feet. That night, Ellen found herself unable to sleep. She lay beside Robert, eyes open, listening to the creaking and pacing above. Suddenly, just past midnight, the footsteps stopped. A silence settled, thick, absolute. Then, unexpectedly, slow steps descended the stairs. Ellen held her breath. A shadow passed the crack beneath her bedroom door. She saw the shape of his coat brushing the floorboards. Heard the faint sound of the front latch opening. The lodger slipped into the fog. Not hurried. Not stealthy. Just, determined. Ellen rose and peered through the curtains. She caught one brief glimpse of him under the street lamp, tall, solitary, his figure swallowed by mist, before he vanished entirely. He returned 2 hours later. Ellen saw his silhouette through the front window, coat wet, hat glistening with fog, boots coated in damp grime. He paused at the gate. And then, in one startling moment, as if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Straight at her window. His eyes, pale and reflective in the lamplight, met hers through the misted glass. Not threatening. Not pleading. But filled with an emotion she couldn't decipher. Then he turned and entered the house. Upstairs, his pacing resumed once more, softer this time. Slower. But somehow heavier. Shadows flickered faintly across the walls. And downstairs, Ellen sat alone in the parlor, trembling, knowing one terrifying truth. Whatever burden the lodger carried. He was nearing the moment when he would no longer be able to bear it alone. Chapter 6, Close Calls. The next morning dawned brittle and colorless, as though the sun had lost the will to shine. A fine frost clung to the windows, the glass was feathered with cold. Ellen moved through the kitchen with stiff fingers, setting the kettle to boil as she tried to steady her nerves. She had slept only an hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the lodger's pale, haunted face lifted toward her window. She wasn't afraid of him, not exactly. She was afraid of the storm gathering around him. And it was gathering fast. Daisy swept into the kitchen in a breathless rush. "Mom! You'll never believe what Mr. Boswell told me." But she stopped short when she saw the look on Ellen's face. "Mum, what's wrong?" Ellen forced a smile. "Nothing. Just tired." Daisy's eyes drifted toward the ceiling. The pattern of footsteps had already begun upstairs, slow, measured, restless. "Is he going to stay in his room all day again?" Daisy asked, half impatient, half curious. "Honestly, I've never met a man who moved around so much without ever going anywhere." Ellen's throat tightened. She almost told Daisy about last night, the shadow at the gate, the fog-wreathed silhouette slipping away, but she stayed silent. Daisy had a dangerous talent for excitement. She'd make a story of it, and stories traveled. "Don't gossip about him," Ellen said softly. Daisy blinked. "I wasn't gossiping." "Promise me," Ellen insisted. Daisy, promise me you'll keep your thoughts to yourself. Daisy frowned but nodded. All right. I promise. At that moment, the lodger appeared in the doorway. His sudden presence startled them both. He was dressed immaculately as always, but his face was pale, drawn tighter than usual. His eyes held a faint redness, as though from wind, or from weeping. "Good morning," he said. Daisy gave a bright little curtsy, playing at politeness. "Morning, sir." The lodger nodded but said nothing more. He moved toward the table with precise steps, folding himself into his seat as if every movement had been predetermined. His gloves rested near his plate, always the gloves, always within reach. Ellen placed tea before him. He wrapped both hands around the cup. His fingers trembled slightly against the porcelain. "Cold morning," Ellen ventured. "Yes," he murmured. "Cold. And unsettled." Ellen exchanged a quick glance with Daisy, who raised her brows. "Are you expecting visitors, sir?" Ellen asked, trying to sound casual. "No," his voice was clipped. "But I sense a certain tension in the streets today." Daisy perked up. "Oh. That's probably what I was going to tell Mum. There are policemen everywhere this morning. They've been questioning people on the corners." "Daisy," Ellen warned sharply. But Daisy waved a hand. "It's nothing. They're just keeping an eye out. They say the Avenger was spotted near." The lodger's teacup clicked sharply against its saucer. Daisy stopped mid-sentence. "I would appreciate," he said quietly, "if we did not speak of that creature over breakfast." Ellen nodded quickly. "Of course, sir." He closed his eyes a moment, regaining composure. When he opened them again, the calm facade had returned, but only barely. It wasn't 10 minutes later that a knock rattled the front door. A firm, unmistakable knock. Ellen froze, tray in hand. Daisy gasped. The lodger's gaze snapped toward the hallway. Ellen's heart thudded painfully. She wiped her hands on her apron and forced her legs to move. When she opened the door, Detective Sergeant Abrams stood on the step, hat low, expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Bunting," he said. "Apologies for another visit." Ellen's mouth went dry. "Is something the matter?" "A disturbance was reported nearby last night," Abrams said. "We're following up with every home on the row." Ellen swallowed hard. Behind her, she heard the faintest shift of floorboards. The lodger had risen from his chair. Abrams glanced past her shoulder. He saw the movement too. "Is your lodger at home?" he asked. "Yes," Ellen said. "He is. I'd like a word with him." Routine questions. Ellen stepped aside, pulse pounding. Abrams entered the hallway. The lodger appeared at the kitchen door, posture perfect, expression placid. Only the faint tightening of his hands around his gloves betrayed any tension. "Sir," Abrams said, "might I trouble you for a moment?" The lodger inclined his head. "Of course." Ellen hovered in the doorway as Abrams gestured toward the parlor. "Your landlady tells us you've been here 2 nights, the detective began. "That is correct," the lodger replied. "Were you out at any point last night?" Ellen felt the question like a blade. Daisy, behind her, sucked in a breath. The lodger paused. A dangerous pause. "Then, I was. I took a walk." The air was oppressive. "Walks late at night are becoming ill-advised," Abrams said mildly. "Given recent events." "I am aware," the lodger murmured. "But I trouble no one." Abrams studied him for a fraction too long. "Did you see or hear anything unusual while you were out?" The lodger's jaw flexed. "I did not." A lie. Ellen knew it was a lie. She didn't know what he'd seen, but she knew he had seen something. Abrams flipped his notebook shut. "Well," the detective said, "should you recall anything of use, please speak to me at once." I doubt I will be of help, the lodger said. Abrams gave one more lingering look, not hostile, but deeply assessing, then dipped his hat and left. The door closed behind him. The lodger stood motionless in the parlor. His breathing was shallow, controlled, but the tremor in his hands had returned. Finally, he turned toward Ellen. "My apologies," he said softly. "If my presence brings you trouble." Ellen shook her head. "It's only the police being cautious." "Caution," the lodger repeated, voice distant. "Yes. That is wise." His eyes lifted, meeting hers. "Mrs. Bunting," he said quietly, "if the police return, I ask that you say nothing more of my habits." "Nothing at all." Ellen's throat tightened. "Sir, are we in danger?" The lodger paused, struggling with the weight of an answer he could not give. "No," he said finally. "You are not." But his voice was trembling. "And you?" Ellen dared to ask. His eyes softened with something like sorrow. "I fear," he whispered, "that I may be in more danger than anyone realizes." That night, the tension in the house thickened into something tangible, a presence, a pressure. The lodger stayed in his room, pacing only briefly, scribbling in his notebook with a feverish intensity. Ellen listened at the foot of the stairs once, heartbeat thudding, and heard a soft murmur through the door, the lodger speaking, barely above a whisper, as though pleading with someone. "No more," he breathed. "Not tonight. Don't ask me for tonight." Ellen fled down the stairs. She didn't understand what he meant. But she felt the cold edge of whatever hunted him. And outside in the fog, footsteps passed the house, slow, methodical, patrolling. Watching. Waiting. The circle was tightening. Closer. Closer still. Soon, someone would break. The question was whether it would be the lodger. Or the men hunting him. Chapter 7, A Knife in the Fog. By dusk the fog had thickened into a gray, living thing that swallowed lamplight whole. It crept around the corners of houses and curled along the cobblestones like fingers searching for a pulse. The city felt muffled, subdued, hushed by dread. Inside the Buntings' home, Ellen lit every lamp she could, though none seemed bright enough. The air was tense, as if the walls themselves were listening. Robert dozed by the fire, his breathing shallow. Daisy scrubbed the last of the day's dishes, humming faintly to steady her own nerves. And upstairs, the lodger was silent. Too silent. No pacing. No scribbling. No restless footsteps tracing the same obsessive patterns. Ellen felt the silence pressing against her ears, heavy and unnatural. At last she gathered herself and climbed the stairs. The hallway was cold. A draft whispered through the cracks, chilling her skin. She paused outside his door. "Sir," she called softly. No answer. "Mr. Slight." Still nothing. Ellen's heartbeat quickened. She raised her hand, hesitated, then knocked. The door, unlatched, slid open with a faint sigh. The room was empty. The lamp on the table had been left burning low, a soft pool of amber light flickering against the walls. His coat, usually hung with meticulous care, was gone. The black pouch had vanished. The notebook lay open, pages fluttering slightly in the draft. Something was missing. Something else. Ellen's eyes swept the room. Then she saw it. The locket. The little silver locket he had cradled with such grief only nights before, gone from the washstand. Ellen's breath caught in her throat. He had taken it with him. Downstairs, the front door stood ajar. The fog rolled into the hallway like smoke. Ellen clutched the banister. Robert. Daisy. But before she could call them fully, a scream pierced the night. A woman's scream. Sharp. Guttural. Close. Daisy dropped a dish, it shattered on the floor. Robert jerked awake with a cough. "Mum, what was that?" Daisy gasped. Another scream, farther now, but clear. Still terrified. Ellen rushed to the door and peered into the fog-choked street. Lamplight trembled weakly against the murk. Shapes moved, neighbors flinging open shutters, men stepping into the haze with lanterns. And then... footsteps. Someone running. Running fast. A figure burst from the fog at the far end of the row, a man in a dark coat, sprinting, his silhouette distorted by the lamplight. "Is that?" Daisy whispered, pushing beside Ellen. She didn't finish the question. Because a second figure emerged behind him, staggering, clutching her side, gasping for breath. A woman. Her dress torn. Her face pale with terror. "It's him," she shrieked, voice cracking with fear. "He's here, he tried to." Her legs buckled. She fell to her knees on the cobblestones, sobbing. A shout erupted from across the street. "Stop! Stop him!" More men rushed into the fog, 3, 4, 5. The police. Helmets and truncheons glinting faintly. They barreled past the Bunting's front gate. Ellen couldn't breathe. The running man slowed, just for a heartbeat, under the wavering lamplight. His face flashed into view. Pale. Focused. Tormented. The lodger. "No," Ellen whispered. "Oh no." Daisy's hand flew to her mouth. The lodger didn't look at the woman behind him. He didn't look at the officers. He didn't even look at the house. He simply ran. Not away. Through. Straight into the thickest part of the fog. The policeman charged after him, boots thudding, whistles shrieking. Ellen stumbled forward a step. "He's innocent," she whispered, though she had no proof, only a desperate, instinctual certainty. "He didn't, he couldn't." "Ellen!" Robert barked from behind her, gripping the doorway. "Get back from the street." But Ellen couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the swirling haze where the lodger had vanished. Then, a voice boomed through the fog. "We have him." He turned on to Miller's Lane. Another shout cut him off. "He's headed toward the river." Chaos roared through the neighborhood. Men with lanterns poured into the street. Women huddled in doorways. Windows flew open. And amid the noise, another voice rose, familiar, frantic. "Sergeant Abrams. Abrams, over here." From the mist came Abrams himself, lantern raised high, coat flapping behind him as he strode toward the wounded woman. "Miss, are you hurt? Did he have a weapon? Did he say anything?" The woman sobbed harder. I saw a knife," she choked out. "A long one. He came out of nowhere, grabbed me." Ellen's blood froze. That wasn't right. The lodger had been carrying nothing. She was certain. Abrams frowned sharply. "Why did he run?" He looked mad. Eyes wild, the woman cried. "He tried, she broke into sobs again. Daisy trembled beside her mother. "Mom," she whispered. "They'll catch him." But Ellen wasn't so sure. Or rather, she wasn't sure she wanted them to. Not until she knew the truth. Minutes dripped by. The fog throbbed with distant shouts and whistles. Then, abruptly, a scream tore through the haze. A man's scream this time. Followed by a crash. A splash. Ellen staggered back. "The river," she whispered. "Oh dear God, they've driven him into the river." Daisy clutched Ellen's arm. "Mum, do you think he's—" Ellen didn't answer. She didn't know. Not yet. But she knew this. The lodger had not chased that woman. He had been running from something else, something older, heavier, colder. Something that had followed him into their house and was now storming through the streets after him. Something Ellen feared was not a man at all, but a memory. And memories, she knew, were the most dangerous predators of all. Still 5 more chapters to come.